On today's episode of Locked On Utes, we're discussing some talented pass catchers visiting the Utah football program. What would they bring to the team? Also, what Bronny James committing to USC means for the Utah men's basketball team, and Utah basketball may be getting a talented guard of their own. All that and more on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We're available on all platforms, including YouTube. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, we're talking some Utah basketball a little bit with a commit they've brought in, how Bronny James going to USC impacts the Utah basketball program. But we have to start with the Utah football team bringing in more talented transfers for a visit. The first one was Shane Hollywood Hooks, the former Jackson State receiver, came into Utah and visited over the weekend. And when you talk about Shane Hooks, you're talking about a guy, and his name is Shane Hooks, but he's got Hollywood on there. And one of my favorite recent college receivers of memory is Marquise Hollywood Brown of Oklahoma Sooners back when he was with Kyler Murray. So I do like that the Hollywood name is in there too. And he's a big time player. So I think he justifies having that Hollywood nickname. But when you're talking about Shane Hooks, as I mentioned, the former Jackson State receiver, this guy's really talented, and playing with Shedeur Sanders, he put up some really impressive numbers in his first season with the team in 2021, 16 receptions, 199 yards, so 2 touchdowns, average of 12 yards a catch. Then in 2022, is he going to take that freshman the first year? Is he going to step up and have that sophomore kind of a season? And he absolutely did. 64 receptions, 748 yards, 11 yards, the reception average, average yards per catch, and then 10 touchdowns overall for Hooks. So huge increase, 8 more touchdowns, about 600 more yards, and gosh, almost, I want to say 30 more catches. I'm not the best with math, but just look at it overall, 64-16. So Hooks is a really talented pass catcher. Just watching the film from the guys that Utah's brought in so far, Micah Pittman, we know the Trajan Bridges thing, there's all that up in the air still, obviously, but just watching the film from what I've seen, when I watch Shane Hollywood Hooks, his tape to me is the best of any of the guys that this Utah team is talking to. When you talk about the length, that's one thing I really like about him. I mean, this guy is a 6'4", 205, and I feel like he uses that size well. He is kind of more of a mirror to what a Devon Vele is for this Utah football team, maybe with his ability to go up, high point the ball, make those as that big catch radius with those long arms. So when you talk about Shane Hollywood Hooks, you're talking about a guy who's good after the catch. He understands how to get open versus zone. Does a good job shaking out of tackles. Really strong, good body control. Does a good job staying in bounds on the sideline. Can make those back shoulder grabs, adjust to the ball well. He's athletic. He can be a deep threat. And as I said, based on his film, I came away more impressed with him than I did Pittman and then watching Trajan Bridges. And look, Bridges, Pittman were both higher recruits coming out, but we've seen before with this Utah football program, the job they have done with some of these lesser and smaller school recruits, that you can have guys who don't have as high stars as some of the other players who work hard, buy in, and then they end up passing some of those other schools. So I think it's a big credit in part to those guys who put in the work and are able to do those things. And I'm really excited about Utah getting Pittman. We've talked about the Bridges situation a lot. If Utah feels good about bringing him in, then I am fine with that decision because I trust the coaches to do the due diligence and work on that. But just talking about Shane Hooks once again, I think this guy is an incredible talent. I think he'd be a great weapon for Cam. I think he'd have a chance to come in, and man, it's hard because Cam already has the chemistry with Devon. But I will say this. I think there's a chance that he could be second on the team in receiving yardage if he committed here, Shane Hooks. I just think he's that talented of a player. As I mentioned, just the ability to break out of those tackles, the length he has, the long wingspan, just all that ability that we were just discussing a moment ago. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Shane Hollywood Hooks' game. I think he is a special player. I think he can get it done from the outside, the slot, as I said, just understands how to beat all the different kind of coverages and just those ability to break tackles, to stay in bounds, make those sideline grabs, the one-handers, even like it just he's a really athletic and a special talent. And I think would be a huge get for this Utah football program if they can lock him in. He is going to have a lot of visits lined up outside of Utah, so it's going to be tough. But the fact that he was in Utah for a visit, I think, speaks to a really good sign of the position this program is in. And once again, I really like the decision to bring him in because I think this is a really talented guy who could help make a difference on the outside for this Utah team right away and still has those couple years of eligibility left. So good to use this year. And then next year, I think would have a chance to be the number one receiver if he committed here. Or number one pass catcher option overall, because we know Brant Keithy's going to be the top guy, followed by Vele this year. And as I said, I think Hooks has a slim chance to beat out Vele if he come in here just because he's that talented, but we'll wait and see. The other guy Utah football is currently talking to is Landon King, a former Auburn tight end. And look, King wasn't super productive with the Tigers overall, but did have some nice flashes and just kind of moments with them. In 2022, only caught one pass for 24 yards, but in 2021, he caught 5 balls for 59 yards. And one of those catches, how are players going to respond? How are they going to step up in big moments, right? That's something with a guy like King. Normally, you wouldn't have a good gauge of that, but King in the Auburn, Alabama quadruple overtime game. He caught a touchdown in that game, and it was a great catch too. It was a nice diving catch made. The coverage was really tight. He did a great job tracking the ball in, securing the catch while falling to the ground. Like, he's a guy I trust to come in and make some plays. I think he would be a great guy to come in, and because he played so limitedly, he did keep his redshirt year from last season. So I think he still has 3 years of eligibility left, which would be amazing. I think King to Utah makes a ton of sense to me because if you're King, you can come into Utah. Yes, you will be the backup tight end to Brant Kuithe and probably Thomas Yasmin this year. Although I do think there would be a lot of times we'd see on 3rd and long where maybe it's like, King, maybe he's playing a little better than Yasmin today or something like that. I think I think he's definitely going to contribute this season, but I think he'd still be the 3rd tight end, just more of a pass catching option than, let's say, we know Mickey Sugatraga is going to be more the blocking tight end, right? Like, I think Landon King can be more of a 3rd pass catching tight end that this Utah team really didn't have last season, which they would have had Dalton Kincaid, Brant Kuithe stayed healthy. So in Brant, Dalton, and then Yasmin, who would have seen the field some. So, but either way, what do I like about King? So I like that he's a big body, can high point passes and come down with those contested catches. That's a little similar to Shane Hooks, but he's different, right? He's got a stronger, a bigger frame overall. He's 6'5", 220, which, I mean, Hooks actually is 6'4", 205. So it's not a huge difference in frame overall. But I think when you get King in the weight room more and just get him working with Fred Whittingham Jr., I think he'd be able to add more muscle, get a little stronger too. But he's a good route runner for the tight end position. I like the catch radius, as I mentioned. I think he does a good job adjusting the balls. As I said, that catch he had against Alabama, I was very impressed by that. Diving grabs. He really sells out for passes too. He's willing to dive, put his body on the line, fearless over in the middle of the field, and made some big plays versus Alabama. Now, look, yeah, he didn't play against Auburn, but sometimes things just don't work out. There's other guys where you're young in your career, still trying to figure out, make everything work. He transferred to go find a better opportunity. Utah football is in a better position than Auburn football right now. And Auburn could get there eventually. Like, they got a new head coach and everything. Shout out to Zach Blackerby, who's the host of Locked On Auburn. But like right now, I think Utah is in a position where their tight end room is amongst the best in the country. They bring in a guy in King. I think there's a chance he can make an impact right away, work with him, get him up to speed too. So I think of the two guys we're talking about here, I think Shane Hooks, I think it's going to be tough to add him. I just think there's going to be a lot of interest there. Landon King is a guy I really think this Utah team has a strong possibility to add. Steve Bartle of Ute Zone was the first to kind of report that he was coming up and take a visit with this team. And it wasn't long after that King himself posted that he was in Salt Lake. So I know you guys always do a great job of going on and showering him with some love about coming and play for this Utah team. And he's a guy I really hope this group can get, because if something were to happen with Brant Kuithe and Thomas Yasmin, I mean, I feel okay about Utah's depth, but I mean, Landon King, when you're looking at him, and yes, Munir McClain might factor into that rotation too, but I think he would I do think Landon King would walk in and be tight end 3. And I think he can make a difference and make some grabs on the outside right away, because the highlights and the moments are there. He just struggled to put it all together at Auburn with stronger coaching from the tight end position, a great leader and a veteran like Brant Kuithe to help show him the ropes. And Thomas Yasmin could work with him too, seeing as Yasmin's made some incredible plays at the tight end position, obviously in some of Utah's biggest game last season. I really think that Landon King can thrive at Utah. So hopefully Utah lands one of these guys. I would love if they could land both of them, but I love that this Utah team is being active in the transfer portal and just bringing in talented players. And speaking of bringing in talented players, that's what USC basketball was able to do when they brought in Bronny James. And we're going to talk about Bronny James and him going to USC and how that may impact Utah basketball in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at Built Bar. Looking for a delicious snack, but don't want all the sugar and calories? Then you need the best tasting protein bar ever. Built, you got to try this. If you're like me and you want to make healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on taste, then I've got just the thing for you. Built bars and built puffs. Built bars and puffs are healthy and they taste amazing. Seriously, they taste so amazing. You won't think they're good for you, but you got to try this. What makes built bars so good? Well, for starters, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievably great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is they're healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. For a long time, we've been talking about going over to Built.com and get your box of Built bars, but now you can head over to your local Smith's or Sam's Club and pick up a box of Built bars today. So many great flavors, cookies and cream, double chocolate bar, or coconut puffs. So once again, there's great options. You can go to Built.com or your local Smith's or Sam's Club and pick up some great, healthy, and tasty, delicious Built bars. Alrighty, coming back into this one. Let's talk Bronny James, shall we? Of course, the son of LeBron James was currently, I think, the highest NIL earner I saw amongst all high school and collegiate athletes. So, yes, I believe Bronny James makes more than Caleb Williams, more than whatever football player you can think of. Basically, Bronny James makes more than them, which is insane. But that's the weight of NIL is name, image, and likeness. Who has a bigger name, image, and brand being the likeness part than Bronny James right now, the son of LeBron, of course. And Bronny is a really talented player. I think a lot of people discounted him and kind of said like, oh, it's just LeBron's son. How good can he be? But when you turn on the film and watch him, I mean, you're talking about a really athletic guard in Bronny James. I mean, this guy has his father's athleticism a little bit, right? Not as insane, but like he can soar through the lane, finishes well around the rim still, good outside shot still. It's not like a knockdown shooter. Like he's not Gabe Madsen from outside, but he can hit some shots from the outside too, can create off the dribble. And I mean, he's a guy Bronny James would walk in, and I think he would be the best player on this. If Brandon Carlson comes back, which is still up in the air, right? As he hasn't officially, he's worked out for teams, but hasn't hired the agent, done that whole process. So still a chance that he could come back. That's where I really think that where Bronny James coming in, I think he would instantly be the second best player on this Utah basketball team and instantly start and give them some explosiveness and athleticism in the backcourt. And we're actually going to talk about Utah basketball in a second. But first, how does this impact Utah basketball? Well, number one, the curtains will be open when USC comes to the Huntsman next season. I remember when Lonzo Ball came out to Utah. That place was packed because everyone wanted to see Lonzo Ball. The show he put on with the Bruins was a sight to behold. It was a special product they were putting on the floor. It was great watching Lonzo get the ball, watching them run the break. That was something that was fun and really exciting to see. So Bronny James is not just great for USC basketball, he's great for the Pac-12. And I think that's one of the really cool things. And one of the interesting things about Bronny, too, is he probably won't even start because Isaiah Collier, who is ranked as the second best player in 2020 in the 2023 class based on 24/7 Sports, they have him going to USC too. He's a point guard. Boogie Ellis is back. We saw what he did against Utah last year and against a lot of the other teams. He was one of the top guards in the Pac-12. So I think those will be the two starters because all three of these guys, Collier, Ellis, and James, are all 6'3". But this is basketball, positionless game. And if you got athletes who are strong enough, and I do think Bronny James is strong enough to be able to play the three early on. I think there are some matchups he won't be able to, but I think they'll be able to get away with playing the three guys who are 6'3" because they're so athletic together. They're going to be strong defensively. They'll buy in. So I think this is a great move for the Pac-12. As I mentioned, I think this is a huge win for them. I'm excited to see because the Pac-12 is going to get a boost, and that's huge with everything that's going on right now. That we're in the media rights deal, you want eyes and everything on it, and there are going to be a lot of people who are lining up to watch Bronny James. Gosh, I expect almost every one of USC's games to be. I mean, there will be some on Pac-12 Network, but I think a lot of them. I think ABC and ABC, geez, college basketball is not played on ABC, but ESPN, major Fox games, all of that is going to want to have the opportunity to put Bronny James on their network. So great exposure for the Pac-12. When Bronny James comes out to Utah next season, that's going to be a nationally televised game. It's going to be a big time ESPN game. I could see Dave Pash and Bill Walton being on the call for it, which I think is great for this Utah team. So if you get a win and you beat them, that's huge exposure. So I think that's really important for this Utah team. So I think, once again, I think this is great for Utah. I think it's great for the Pac-12 overall that they're in this position where one of the most exciting players and one of the top NIL earner is going to play in the Pac-12 because Utah's going to play him twice a year. So if Utah is going to have a chance to get that major exposure like they did last season when they beat Arizona, whether that's when they go out to play USC or when they welcome USC to their place, there's going to be a lot of eyes on that game because everything Bronny James does is going to be closely under a microscope. I saw it was Jay Williams on ESPN said this is going to be the most hyped college basketball player we've seen since Zion Williams. And I agree. And I actually think his hype will be even more, even though he'll come off the bench a little bit. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at, monitoring, and watching what Bronny James was. Also, I mentioned Bronny as a top NIL earner. He's number one. I do think Caleb Williams is number two because I mentioned he makes more than Caleb Williams. So that USC, their Trojan collective, or whatever you want to call it, is making out okay. And look, we don't know about. I don't know exactly. I don't know if USC like necessarily outbid everyone for Bronny. I think it's alluring to want to stay in LA with the nice weather and obviously everything that offers. So I do think it makes a lot of sense why he's still committed to USC, even if NIL wasn't a factor. But I find it hard to believe a player of Bronny James's caliber, who I do believe ended up as a top 10 ranked player in his class. And if not that, I think he's definitely a top 20 guy. Makes sense why USC would want him, obviously, because he is a really talented player. And it's going to be fun to see what kind of impact he makes in year one. And it's crazy to think that someone with the last name James, who's related to LeBron James and a really good basketball player, is going to be playing in the Huntsman, I guess. And LeBron obviously got the shots up last year because that's where the All-Star game was, the practices, All-Star practices were up in the Huntsman too. So I'm excited to see it. As I mentioned, I think this instantly makes these games like must watch. It adds value to the Pac-12. So I'm really excited to see what Bronny James is able to do with USC. And I think that these games are good. First, Utah basketball are going to be a lot of fun and gives them an opportunity to get some wins against marquee matchups. Those are the kind of wins you get against the USC where a lot of eyes are watching. So then people start talking, that circulates, right? Could be good for rankings, whether you're trying to make the NIT or if Utah can be, it's going to be hard for them to make the NCAA tournament next year, but just the trajectory of this program, you hope they finish the season out better. Like there was a time last season, they seemed like an NIT lock. And then obviously the last month of that season happened, that was a complete disaster. So that's where I'm curious to see how this team will be coming into this season. But it's going to be fun to see Bronny James out there and what he can do. I think Will Exact would be the guy who would end up guarding Bronny a lot just because of the size profile. But I mean, as I said, he could be their third or fourth best player with Isaiah Collier, Boogie Ellis, and some of the other talented guys they bring back. So definitely going to be fun to monitor and watch and get to see Bronny James come up to face the Utes in the Huntsman coming in 2023 and 2024, or actually just 2024. I don't think they'll play him. They could play that early December game, right? But either way. But there is another guy who could guard Bronny James could potentially, and that is a guy that Utah basketball had up for a visit recently, and that is Davon Smith. And when you talk about Davon Smith, a former Georgia Tech guard, this is a guy who has incredible bounce. He's a high flyer. He's an elite athlete, moves fast with the ball in his hands, really athletic, finishes well around hoop, makes some nice passes too, and just float through the lane. Does that any of what I just said sound like what Utah had in their backcourt last season? Maybe Mike Saunders versus UCLA with the finishes well around the basket, right? Like that's it. But no, he is a polar opposite to Raleigh Wooster. And look, this Utah team, with the way college basketball is played today, they have to get more athletic. And I think adding a guy like Deivon Smith would be huge. And this is a guy when you talk about Deivon Smith, who last season with Georgia Tech he averaged 8 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists on 39% shooting. And he started a few games for them, started 13 and came off the bench for 24, but had played 24 minutes a game overall, shot 39% from the field. Not the best 3-point shooter, just 26%, but that's okay. I'm more interested in his athleticism and ability to attack the basket. One thing that we have to get up is that free throw percentage, I will say, just 44% from last season, but only took one and only on 1 to 2 per game. So definitely want to get that up. But I like the rebounds. That's a guy who can grab a board and push the pace, which I think is huge when you're trying to get more fast break points. That was something Utah just didn't get a lot of last year. It felt like just watching those games, right? As they would slowly bring the ball up the court because they didn't have the athletes. Utah doesn't have a guy like Deivon Smith, who when he gets the ball, even while he's dribbling, dudes can be sprinting and Deivon can still beat them to the other end of the court because he is simply that great of an athlete. He's got that much quickness, speed, and just bounce. He was the top player on SportsCenter one week for this one dunk he had on Georgia Tech, when he was with Georgia Tech, where it was a steal and he was in the open floor, and he just got so high off the ground. I mean, it was absolutely incredible, and had this monster jam. I also think he could be a tenacious defender. He's got good quick hands, good instincts, reflexes that I think would aid the Utes defensively. And I think he would come in and I think he'd have a great chance to be a starting point guard for this team too, because as I mentioned, did transfer away from Georgia Tech. He didn't start his college career there, started it with Mississippi State. This is a guy who has his senior season. So just looking to make his last ride with the Utes overall because he has played in over 20 games in all 3 years of college. So he's got a lot of experience too, kind of looking to capitalize in and find himself an opportunity to start. Has averaged a turnover a game each season, but as I said, he's a guy who's either had a steal or finished just half a zero point off of averaging a steal. So I like the defense. I like the offense, that athleticism, what he would bring to this team in transition, as I mentioned, I think would be huge. I watched this guy for 40 seconds and I texted some of my friends and people. I'm like, Utah basketball needs this guy. This is what they're missing. The excitement. I can already see like the lobs he would throw to Caba or Carlson would be must see, electric. There is so much dynamic and fun stuff this guy would bring to this Utah basketball team. The life, the energy, I just think on the court, just put fans in the seats. He's fun to watch. So I really hope Utah can close a deal with this guy. We know they missed out on Chance McMillan. That was really tough. McMillan, obviously a really talented player, ended up going to Texas Tech, the Grand Canyon transfer. But they did got the shooter from Washington, who I'm blanking on his name right now, so I apologize to him. But I think him and Gabe Matson are going to light it up from the outside. If you get, some of those pick and rolls where it's Carlson, with Davion running the point, Carlson screening for him, and then you get on the outside, you have Gabe and some of the other guys on this team spotting up. I think, and Will too. Hopefully, he can make a sophomore leap. I think that would be a really devastating offensive combination. And as I said, I think Davion can guard. You can throw him at Collier, Boogie Ellis, Bronny James. He's not shutting him down, but I think he's making life difficult on him because of his quickness and ability to stay in front of them. And I know he's not the greatest shooter, but I want a guy who can attack the basket, who has that speed, that burst, the ability to quickly get by guys off the dribble, finish well around the rim, as I mentioned, and just absolutely just dunk on a dude. I mean, those are the plays we love in basketball, right? So I think this guy is a must get for this Utah team. I really hope Craig Smith and his program can close the deal, because I think he would provide them a huge boost in the backcourt just for his athleticism overall. And he's what Utah's been missing, an athletic, high flying guard, something they haven't had in the last 2 seasons. And he would bring it in. And I think it would be a spectacle in the John M. Huntsman Center. So hopefully Utah's able to close the deal on him on the court. Hopefully Utah's able to close the deal on Landon King and Shane Hooks. But it's going to be fun and interesting to monitor how it all plays out. Just like it'll be interesting to see when Bronny James comes up to the Huntsman. So that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Make sure you guys join me again tomorrow, as I am going to be having Spencer McLaughlin on of the Locked On Pac-12 podcast. We're going to talk about, with Utah, how long until like Mark Harlan and the school would think about leaving if the media rights deal still isn't completed. As I said, just talk about like at what point they would be like, well, we're going to leave since this isn't done. That's going to be on tomorrow's Locked On Utes. We'll see you then.